Hey there, everyone. My name is Joey Lindstrom here at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. My clock is showing 2:01, so we are about to get started. First, let me say thank you for joining us today, and then secondly, let me say thank you for the reason you're joining us today, because you're all new members who joined this year during 2017, and we very much appreciate the support that you offer our work through your membership. So, today, we are going to be talking about NLIHC and what you need to know about us to get the most out of your membership. I should say at the outset that this webinar is being recorded and that the recording will be made available to each of you. Also, please note that on the control panel for this webinar, you can type questions into the questions bar, the questions box at the bottom of your panel. That should be on the right-hand side of your screen. So, who will you be hearing from today? It'll be those of us on the field team who are responsible for membership and act as your primary liaisons to NLIHC. On your screen, you see Sarah Jemison on the left. She's one of our great housing advocacy organizers. That's me there in the middle. And then we have James on the right-hand side. That's James Sassetto, our other housing advocacy organizer. We'll get into, in greater detail, what our roles are as the field team and how we interact with you as members. But for right now, I'd like to start by sharing just an overview of what we'll be talking about today. The first is some NLIHC background, some history about who we are and how we came to be the NLIHC that you've come to know as members. We'll also talk about our policy focus, what we're working on changing here on Capitol Hill in DC. We'll talk about the data and reports that support the arguments we make to Congress and to the administration, and data and reports that you use for your local advocacy as well. We'll share some tips for effective advocacy within NLIHC's operations, and then we'll talk about membership and what it means to be a member and how you can maintain your membership going forward. And then finally, we'll have plenty of time for questions, so please feel free to submit those throughout. All right, so first let's talk about some background about the National Low Income Housing Coalition. We were founded in 1974, and we were founded originally as the National Low Income Housing Information Service, right? And the reason we were an information service is our founder, Cushing Dolbear, pictured on the slide you're looking at, really felt that the most important thing our nation needed was information in the hands of community advocates who believed in social justice, economic justice, and housing for all. And so this perspective at our founding is what has informed our high-level research products and our focus on breaking our research down into county by county or city by city manageable pieces that advocates can use throughout the country. Cushing Dolbear, if you ever had the chance to meet her, was incredibly energetic and engaging, and you immediately, when you were in her presence, knew that you were about to learn something. I only had the opportunity to meet her once when I was a young advocate in Wisconsin, and it was, for me, a really great connection to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and it provided a lot of context for why we care about what we care about. And Cushing's background as a Pennsylvania Quaker committed to social justice is very much at the heart of who we are and why we go about what we do. If you're at all involved in housing advocacy throughout the country, you probably hear Cushing's name come up a lot because she really was a pioneer, and a lot of her work is reflected in many organizations who work on housing throughout the country. So our mission is somewhat distinct from other national organizations you might be aware of. We are committed to solely to achieving socially just public policy that ensures people with the lowest incomes in the United States have affordable and decent homes. And the term in there that might be most important to you is people with the lowest incomes. We really are focused to make sure that housing subsidies at the national level are focused on people with the greatest needs, so that we're not using scarce federal resources on households who are generally served pretty well by the private market. So there are some terms that we use a lot in our work, and some of these are terms that we'll be using today during this presentation. And these are things that, if you don't know them already, are just really important to have in your back pocket. When we say lowest incomes, we use the term extremely low income. And that's not just being descriptive by saying extremely low income. It's a technical definition that HUD uses. Extremely low income, or ELI, means anyone making 30% or less of area median income. And that's defined, of course, on an area by area standard. So it's usually by county or by metro area. They are at HUD looking at making narrower areas to calculate what it means to be extremely low income. When we use the term affordable, we're also using a specific definition. And for us, that's the Brook Rule. That means paying 30% or less of gross income on rent and utilities. People who are paying more than that are cost burdened. And sometimes you'll hear us use the term severe cost burdened. These are households who pay more than 50% of their gross income on rent and utilities. When we talk about the need for affordable housing, you'll also hear us talk about the need for affordable and decent homes for people to live in. And decent means not just quality, but also accessible for people with disabilities, and things that can be enjoyed according to household size. So our goals to achieve this mission are first to preserve existing federally assisted homes. And just preserving what's already out there can sometimes be an uphill challenge, as many of you know. And when we're doing our preservation work, this refers to all federally assisted homes, whether they be public housing, low-income housing tax credits, project-based rental assistance. Preservation is the extension of the affordability. We also want to expand the supply of low-income housing that's affordable for renters. And we want to establish housing stability as the primary purpose of federal low-income housing policy. So when we work in Congress and when we do our research reports, our focus is always making sure that the solutions we are working toward are not temporary solutions, but those that are permanent and provide stability. So that's our mission. Those are our goals. But who are the folks who are assigned to achieve these goals? That's our team here. We've got, if I'm remembering correctly, 16 people currently, and I'll just mention a little bit about who they are. On your slide right now, you'll see on the left-hand side our President and CEO, Diane Yentl, as well as our Chief Operating Officer, Paul Keeley. And Diane, you've probably met because she's been here almost 2 years, and she's seemingly traveled to every state to do a speaking engagement at a conference.
I think she's still hoping to get to Hawaii.
Right, maybe Hawaii hasn't happened yet.
Have any connections there, and that she'd love an invite.
Right. So very likely you've seen Diane if you've been at a housing conference in your community or state. And if you haven't, well, I'm sure she's on her way there soon. Ed Gramlich, you also might know. Ed is a wonderful resource to have here at NLIHC, and he is responsible for digging into a lot of the regulations at HUD, interpreting what those regulations mean for programs and for people who live in and rely on HUD programs, and helping us provide input when we interact with HUD. Cara Norris and Christina Sin are really essential people for our admin team. Christina working on development and Cara working on administration, and really all of the work that we do involves them, and in many ways is generated by the excellent fundraising work that they're a part of. And then Josephine Clark is the executive assistant who really makes sure that Diane is able to operate at max capacity. Our policy team is on the left. You'll see Sarah Michelson, our Director of Public Policy, and Elaine Weiss, our Senior Policy Analyst. And they are the ones who spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill in committee hearings, doing the lobby meetings. Very often, if there's a really technical question you have about policy, you'll probably be hearing from them. Our communications team consists of Lisa Marlowe and Ellen Erico. They're responsible for all of the great graphics that we use in our reports. They're responsible for the press releases that you see and getting NLIHC research data and perspectives reflected in news media, which has been going great. And then Dan Emanuel and Andrew Arend are on the right-hand side of the slide here. And Dan and Andrew constitute our research team. They provide local advocates such as yourselves with the strength of data to talk about the problem that you're trying to solve, and they break it down on the local level. So their work is extremely valuable. We spend a lot of time talking about how wonderful they are, which is partly because we feel bad for them because they stare at spreadsheets like all day. And that can be really difficult, but their work is extraordinarily valuable, as I'm sure many of you know. And then finally, but not least, is the field team. And that's those of us who you already met on the first slide, as well as our boss, Renee Willis, the Vice President for Field and Communications. And what we do is we work with our members and advocates throughout the country to make sure that they understand the important asks they need to be making of their members of Congress, and that we're providing good talking points and resources they can use to carry that message forward as constituents. So that's sort of an introduction of who we are, what we're about, and what you're supporting by being a member. And I'll now turn it over to Sarah Jemison to talk a little bit more in detail about the policy work that we do at NLIHC.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Joey. Just as a quick reminder, these are the folks who make up our policy team. It's often surprising when people hear how small our staff is here because they really do so much. And so kicking us off on the policy team is Sarah Michelson, their Director of Policy, Ed Gramlich, who works particularly with HUD, anything we have related to HUD, and particularly also focus on fair housing, and then Elaine Weiss, who's a senior policy analyst, and Elaine focuses on budget advocacy in particular, and a lot of our campaigns to work with other housing and community development organizations. To give you a quick overview, just to let you know some of the things that we are working on and have worked on, and if you have questions about any of these, feel free to type in the question box or let one of us know. We're happy to provide you with more information. The first thing that we, is the campaign that we've been working on now about 17 years, is the campaign for the National Housing Trust Fund, and that began as a push for a dedicated source of funding to construct and operate housing for extremely low-income people. And for 8 years, that campaign pushed and pushed for the creation of the trust fund, and then it was passed, but unfortunately quickly put on hold because of the financial crisis. But it is now in action in its second year of states getting block grants to fund housing for extremely low-income households. And so it's a really powerful new tool, and for us stands as an example, even if there many, many years are required for advocacy, it really can be successful and is successful in changing the lives of lowest income people in America. We also do a lot of work around federal tax reform, something that's certainly in the news and picking up in recent weeks, and in particular around the mortgage interest deduction, which currently is a program that provides high-income homeowners with a subsidy to help pay their mortgage, something that we see as a really poor use of federal resources and something we want to retarget so that, first of all, it's a credit that's helpful for low and moderate income homeowners, and it really could be an incentive to buy a home, but then also saves billions of dollars to put into housing for the lowest income people. So we'll get more to that effort, which we call our United for Homes campaign, later in the presentation, but that's something that we work on a great deal. Again, our federal budget, which I mentioned, Elaine does a great deal of work around constantly advocating for the highest funding possible for programs funded through HUD and USDA Rural Development. So you often hear from us about a budget letter that we put out each year with thousands of signatures from advocates across the country who work day in and day out to provide housing and see the need for increased resources. So that's something we do around the federal budget, but it really goes far beyond that letter. We're also looking at the low-income housing tax credit, which is the largest funder of housing that's affordable to low-income people, but unfortunately it often is not affordable to lowest income people. So that's something that we're working on now with various bills in Congress to deeply target and expand the low-income housing tax credit. We also work on the preservation of public housing and assisted housing. So as Joey said, one of the chief ways to create and to continue to have affordable housing in this country is to preserve the affordable housing we already have. And then we also work on planning for just communities, which is looking at affirmatively furthering fair housing and ensuring that as federal resources are invested in communities across the country, we do so in a way that makes them more just, and those resources are going to create communities that are less segregated and provide more opportunity to a larger number of people. And then finally, one that I neglected to add to the slide of this, work around federal disaster recovery. In the aftermath of a disaster, FEMA comes in kind of as a firefighter, but then after that, it's up to community development block grants that are funded through HUD to do all of the rebuilding efforts. And that's something that we're doing a great deal of work around now, particularly in Texas, Florida, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, to ensure that the communities there not only have resources right now, but will continue to get help to rebuild their communities. So our policy stretches across a wide range of issue areas, but it really centers on what is going to provide us with great opportunities to increase funding for housing for the lowest income people. So it all, though there may be kind of many different strategies for creating this funding, it all centers on that central priority. And so then the question is, how do we do that? Well, we work to track, analyze, and engage. We track legislation and then analyze and engage it with our partners and members to make sure we know what's happening, what's been introduced into Congress, how would it affect the people we serve. And then once our policy team has done that, it's our chance to turn and consider what our members want and what extremely low-income residents whom we represent, what do they need out of this legislation, and communicating that with federal policymakers. We do that often by testifying before Congress, communicating with HUD and the administration, and we also coordinate then with other national groups on affordable housing issues. And then our work around policy education, and that's to create information for you, our members and other advocates in the field, to make sure you have what you need to be able to not only know what's going on, but effectively advocate for policies that you believe in with your members of Congress. So we try to provide as much information as possible, certainly through kind of the types of memos we have on the screen right now, but then also through our memo to members each week, which comes out with anything that happens in that's been introduced in Congress or HUD puts out that's related to housing for the lowest income people will show up in memo the following week. So it's constantly trying to keep our members aware of what's happening and how it works. So with that, that's kind of a sense of how we look at doing this work. I'm going to turn it over to James to talk about our research, which then, of course, informs the work that we do and then also enables us to provide information to our field.
All right, thank you, Sarah. So, again, as a reminder, our research team here at NLIHC is comprised of Andrew Arand, our Vice President for Research, and Dan Emanuel, who used to be actually part of our field team as one of our housing advocacy organizers and moved over to be part of our research team coming up on 2 years ago. And as with our policy team, as Sarah mentioned, it's when you take a look at the volume of research that NLIHC publishes and produces each year and all of the tools associated with our research, it's often surprising for folks to learn that our research team is only composed of 2 people. But yes, so Andrew and Dan are our research team. So I'll walk you through some of the findings of our 2 key research publications that we release each year. And the first of which is our annual Out of Reach report. In the Out of Reach report, we examine the number of hours a minimum wage worker needs to work each week in every state, every community, every metro area across the country in order to afford a decent 1- or 2-bedroom apartment. And again, linking back to our definitions of affordable that Joey talked through at the beginning of the presentation, when we take a look at data that comes out of this report, we're looking at the number of hours a minimum wage worker needs to work in order to afford a home, not spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and also not working more than the traditional 40-hour work week. We also take a look at the hourly wage that a worker would need to work in order to afford that same 1- or 2-bedroom apartment. Again, not spending more than 30% of their income on housing and not working more than a 40-hour work week. So this map shows you kind of what, state by state, what these numbers look like, but I'll tell you nationally, the findings of this report are pretty startling. Nationwide, in order to afford a 1-bedroom apartment, a minimum wage worker would actually need to work 94.5 hours per week. And in order to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, that same worker would need to work 117 hours per week, not spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and not working, so 117 hours per week for a 2-bedroom apartment. In order to afford those same 2 homes, a worker would need to work or earn an hourly wage of $17 per hour for a 1-bedroom home, or $21 per hour for a 2-bedroom home. You often think about at the hourly level how that compares to the actual minimum wage, or what workers actually earn. Of course, the minimum wage is nowhere near sufficient in order to afford the cost of housing nationwide or in any community. If you take a look at, of course, depending on how you're watching this presentation, you may not be able to read the numbers that appear on top of each state on the U.S. map, but this information for every state, every metro area and community across the country is available on our website. The findings of this report show us, though, that in the best of cases, minimum wage is still not enough in order to afford housing in really any community across the country. In some of the best cases, with Arkansas, you'd have to work 51 hours a week, more than a 40-hour work week, in order to afford a 1-bedroom apartment, or in Nebraska, 53 hours a week. And in some of the worst cases, in Hawaii, you'd have to work 116 hours per week, nearly 2.5 full-time jobs. In New York, you'd have to work 101 hours per week just to afford a 1-bedroom apartment without spending more than 30% of your income on housing. And if you look at the hourly wage you need to earn for those same apartments, again, in some of the best cases, in Arkansas, you'd have to earn an hourly wage of $13.72 per hour. In some of the worst cases, Hawaii, you'd have to earn a $35 hourly wage. New York, a $28 hourly wage. Far higher, far higher than what actually earn. You take a look at the actual earnings of low-wage workers, low and moderate wage workers across the country. So I'll move on to talking about another of our annual reports that NLIHC is well known for, this being our GAP report. And whereas the Out of Reach report takes a look at sort of the affordable housing crisis from a perspective of how costs compare to what folks actually earn, the GAP report examines the affordable housing crisis from the perspective of the supply question. So go on to the next slide. The GAP report takes note of the fact that for the lowest income people across the country, we have a really startling shortage of housing that exists, that is both affordable and available to the lowest income people. Some key data points that come out of this year's report: nationwide, there are 11.4 million extremely low-income households, renter households across the country. Linking back to the definitions that Joey defined at the beginning of the presentation, that means there are 11.4 million renter households 11.4 million renter households across the country that are earning at or below 30% of the area median income where they live. And for folks in that income bracket, there are only 4 million rental homes affordable and available. We've got a nationwide shortage of 7.4 million rental units. Another way of looking at that data point is to say that for every 100 ELI households across the country, there are only 35 rental units that exist. And that shortage, there is such a shortage for most income groups across the country, although that shortage is not as severe for all. So for instance, for folks that are living at or below 80% of their area median income, there are 93 units per 100 households. For folks at or below 50% AMI, there are 55 units per 100 households. Take note, there's a significant drop when you move from folks that are at 80% AMI down to folks that are at 50% AMI. and even a steeper jump when you move from people that are at 50 down to people that are at or below 30% AMI, that ELI category, of again only 35 units per 100 households. And this is important for how NLIHC frames our policy priorities, because we take notes from the data that we get out of this research that while for many there is an affordable housing shortage in communities across the country, that shortage really truly is deepest and most severe for folks who are at the lowest end of the income spectrum. And in some cases, nationwide for instance, for people that are at 100% of AMI, there's actually a surplus of rental housing affordable. And even slightly below that, people at 80% AMI, there's a little bit of a shortage, but there's a near surplus or a near precise amount of what's needed. For people at 80% AMI, there's 93 rental units affordable and available per 100 households. If you go up on our website, look at the full gap report, there's data from this report that's specific to every state and every county and metro area. So I'd encourage all of you to take a look at that information and apply it to the work that you're already doing in your own communities and organizations. Local and statewide data for both the gap and the out of reach reports. Now, some implications of the data out of this report, speaking to the chart that you're all looking at. If a person is living in housing that they cannot afford, so they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing, we would say that they're cost burdened, spending more than 30% of their income on housing. As cost of housing rises, once you're spending more than 50% of your income on housing, we would say that you're experiencing a severe cost burden. And now, when rental housing that someone cannot afford simply does not exist, as the findings of this report tell us, you are more likely to experience a cost burden or a severe cost burden. So by the findings of this report, that means, and our data confirms, that as income decreases, the rate of cost burden and severe cost burden increases. So for the 11.4 million ELI households across the country, 9.9 million, or 86%, are experiencing a cost burden. And for those 11.4 million, 8.1 million are experiencing a severe cost burden. That would be 71%. 71% of the poorest households are spending more than half of their income on housing due to many factors, but in large part simply because housing does not exist in this country that they can afford. So those are, in brief, findings from Out of Reach and from the GAP report. We can move on to the next slide. These, along with other reports that we produce, both annually and periodically, are all available on our website. They're available in print as well, but we make all this research widely available. Encourage all of you to take advantage of it. To learn more about what the organization is writing and thinking about, to understand more fully how, where our policy priorities and positions come from, and also to empower the work that you're already doing in your own communities and organizations, especially when it comes to data that we present on a statewide and on a local basis. So a look at some other reports that we've published recently, and these are, again, all up on our website. A Place to Call Home is a report that we published with partner organizations in a group called CHCDF. That's a coalition for housing and community development organizations that we lead here at NLIHC. Place to Call Home collected personal narratives of residents and housing providers who benefit from all of the federal housing programs, really highlighting the fact that there is a need for each and every one of the federal housing programs that we have, and that there's also a need to expand all of them, to really emphasize that each one of those federal programs has a purpose, has people, communities, households that benefit from them, and that a cut to one, it really hurts every other federal program. Housing the Low-Income Households is a report we just published this spring, which takes a look at the first year full of implementation of the new National Housing Trust Fund program by examining the annual allocation plans that each state published for their first round of funding from the program. Misdirected investments just came out a couple of weeks ago, taking a look at the mortgage interest deduction and how it really reinforces the wealth gap across the country as an unwise use of the federal government's investment in housing. And the long wait for a home was a research report we published last year, taking a look at the state of public housing and Section 8 housing waiting lists across the country. On the next slide, I've got a screenshot of our state housing profile. This one that we have available online for Virginia, but of course this is something that's available for all states across the country and available on our website, something that we encourage folks to use in advocacy efforts and in public education campaigns and any form of housing education or advocacy that you take on. This essentially takes data that comes from each of our research sources specific to any particular state and puts it all onto one page for you to make it easy to kind of give you a sense of what our research tells you about your states and makes it easy for you to present that to elected officials wherever you go with your work. So on this sheet, for instance, you'll see, and this is the case for all of these reports, the names of your U.S. senators, a county map showing you how many rental housing units exist per 100 ELI households, information about cost burden and severe cost burden rates, as well as information from the out-of-reach report specific to that state. And on the next slide, we have similar information but presented for a congressional district. And as with the state housing profiles, this is something that we publish every year and update as new information becomes available from the primary data sources that we make use of. This is something that we make available for all 435 congressional districts across the country and encourage people to make frequent use of. I'll highlight, if this wasn't already evident, that as with really any resource that we publish, if you're taking a look at the congressional district housing profile for the first time and aren't quite sure what any of the numbers on this page mean or the implications of them, you are absolutely welcome to get in touch with anyone on our staff, and we'd be delighted to talk with you and help you understand that. And on the next slide, this is a screenshot of the National Housing Preservation Database that NLIHC works to maintain in partnership with PARC, the Public and Affordable Housing Research Corporation. If you've used this in the past, you might recognize from this screenshot that the preservation database actually just went through a bit of a facelift. Our research team, along with folks at PARC, put in a lot of work over the summer and this fall to revamp the database, ensure that all the information in it is accurate and complete as possible. But this is a vital tool when it comes to the preservation of our federally assisted affordable housing stock, because this gives us information on where federally assisted affordable housing units exist in every community across the country, which makes it an important tool in terms of how you can track where assisted affordable housing exists, where preservation and affordability periods are near expiration, and how you can engage in efforts to ensure that they aren't simply lost from the affordable housing supply. So more information about or from that database is available online, and we encourage you to make use of it. So I will pass it over now to Joey, who will talk about field mobilization efforts.
Well, thanks, James, for that great review of our research products, and Sarah for that overview of our policy operations. I'd like to talk to each of you about the most important part of our work, which is each of you, our field, our members and our advocates. As I go through the following slides, I may be talking a little bit fast. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. If that does happen, please remember we will make the recording available to each of you. When I said our field, a moment ago, when I said our field is the most important part of our work, that wasn't just me being kind or flattering. It actually turns out to be quite true. And the happiest thing I've learned in my time here in Washington, D.C. is that members of Congress don't put a lot of importance on what we say here in Washington, D.C. We can have the most brilliant policy analysts, and we do. We can have the best research data put together by our research team, and we do. But they care most about what they hear from our constituents, and that's each of you. And so the focus of our work on the field team is taking the information that we have from our research team, taking the arguments that we have from our policy team, and putting them into your hands so that you can make strong arguments to your members of Congress. So the field team, as a reminder, is comprised of these four beautiful people on your screen right now, and who you've been hearing from today. And one thing you should know is that we divide our field throughout the country, one for each organizer. And if you look at this highly gerrymandered map, what you'll see is that the states in dark blue are states that I coordinate, states in red are states that James coordinates, and states in light blue are states that Sarah coordinates. Now, we do this intentionally so that every time you need to interact with NLIHC, you don't have to figure out, oh, who's the best staff person for me to contact with this question. You can contact one of us, because our job is to be your point person. Our job is to be your liaison. In the case of Sarah Jemison, it will be her job to be that liaison only for a couple of more weeks before she moves on to another position. We're very, very happy for Sarah, but the region of the South and the Mid-Atlantic will soon have a new organizer assigned to them. And that person, if you're in any of those states, will be in touch with you in short order. Otherwise, if you live in any of the other states, please get in contact with myself or James accordingly.
And in the interim, if you are in one of my dear Southern or Mid-Atlantic states, feel free to bug Joey or James as much as possible.
I thought you were going to give everyone your personal cell phone number. No?
Many of them already have it.
Okay, okay. Yeah. All right. So part of our work in field is bugging you about campaigns that we have going on, right? So it might be when we've worked on the spending caps as part of budget sequestration, we launched our Caps Hurt Communities campaign, where we've encouraged advocates throughout the country to talk about programs that are constrained by spending caps and the real people who are impacted. We have our ongoing National Housing Trust Fund campaign, which is how I first became aware of NLIHC back in 2000. And that campaign has been going on since that time, originally to pass a National Housing Trust Fund, then to get money into it, and now that we actually have money in the National Housing Trust Fund, making sure that it's being implemented in the best ways in states throughout the country. Our Homes, Our Voices was another budget campaign that we did this summer. Maybe in your community, someone hosted an event that you attended or participated in, or you were planning as well. And then United for Homes, which is our answer to Congress's age-old question, how are we going to pay for all this housing our country needs? And United for Homes proposes some really simple changes to the mortgage interest deduction in order to generate the amount of money needed to end homelessness in America. So how do we do our work on the field? A lot of it is direct interaction with folks like you over the phone and over email. We also make presentations in workshops and at events throughout the country. We really try to go everywhere where we're invited to be. Sometimes our budget constraints don't allow that, but we try to be in as many places as we can. Very often we'll staff information tables. We'll also join to present on conference calls that you might be having in your community and share some information with stakeholders. We can join and present on webinars to provide some data context or some federal overlap with issues that you might be exploring or talking about. We're here to be available for how you need us in terms of getting information out into the community of advocates you work with. Now, advocacy is extremely important, and our hope, because you're a member of NLIHC, is that it's important to you as well and that you're eager to be a participant in advocacy. One thing we always take a moment to explain to our new members is that advocacy really is important, and it really requires your voice. I think a lot of people expect that our policy team, you know, does all the heavy lifting and all you need to do is send in some money and we're going to make it happen. But the truth is, members of Congress care about hearing from you. You are an expert. Maybe not an expert of all the finer points of housing policy, but you're an expert about what you see going on in your community and in your neighborhood. Your voice matters. I can tell you I had a state legislature in our office just a few weeks ago who was in town for a conference, and she was working on changing their state's mortgage interest deduction. And the realtors in that state are very opposed to this change. They sent out some postcards, and 50 people mailed in postcards to this particular state legislator. And she said, well, when I do something about affordable housing, I might get 4 or 5 letters and emails, but now on this change to the mortgage interest deduction, I get 50. That really resonates for me and people who I'm looking at to vote for this bill, right? And I share this anecdote only to emphasize elected officials actually care about hearing from you. And when you organize many people to talk to them with one voice, that's something that will impact change and get them to modify their behavior and what they're doing. Advocacy doesn't need to be a full-time responsibility, and this is part of our job on the field team. We know you don't have time to read the federal budget. We're going to send out simple calls to action that you can respond to, and this will be how we achieve victory. People throughout the country talking to their members of Congress about change. Over the next 13 months, you're going to be hearing a lot from us about Our Homes, Our Votes. This is an effort to get more and more low-income renters and their allies voting, and more nonprofit organizations focused on housing and homelessness participating in elections. Our Homes, Our Votes will have its own webinars coming up in the upcoming months, but we focus on sort of 3 pieces of voter engagement. First, registration. Second, voter education. And then third, voter mobilization and actually getting people out to the polls. And we hope you'll be involved in that campaign moving forward. We also produce a publication a couple of times a year called Tenant Talk. This is a publication that we write intentionally to be accessible to low-income renters and really explaining federal policy in terms that they find easy to read and then take action on. If you haven't read Tenant Talk, I really encourage you to do so. It's available on our website, or you can sign up to receive it mailed to you at no cost. Probably the most common thing you'll hear from us is a call to action. Something's happening in Congress. A committee's about to vote. The Senate's about to mark up a particular bill, and that we need you to weigh in with your senators or with your representatives. And calls to action are the moments where we're giving you an opportunity to use your voice. So how do you respond to a CTA? You sign your organization onto a letter or you endorse a policy proposal. That's not necessarily contacting your legislator. You're just putting your name onto a letter that we're submitting on behalf of everyone. But then the second ask, which you'll see very often, is, hey, contact your legislator. Follow up with them after you make an ask. Always ask about something in particular, and then follow up with our office to share what feedback you heard from your legislator. This slide sort of goes through how a bill moves in Congress and how we react to it here at NLIHC before you're actually getting that CTA. The first thing we do is we're gathering intelligence about what's happening on Capitol Hill, and then we inform and influence the process of crafting a bill. At that point, we send out a CTA. We're doing our Hill visits. We're asking you to contact your members of Congress. And then we're reevaluating our position based on what we hear back from you and other people in the field about concerns or questions that your members of Congress may have. This is sort of a helpful guide to understand how we do our work and how you can fit within it. But the most important thing for us on the field is that we're making you feel confident that you're using your voice at the right time and in the most impactful way. Sarah's going to share a couple of notes about membership, and then it looks like we'll have about 10 minutes available for questions.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Joey. So one question we get kind of, who are NLIHC members? And so this is from a study we did a few years ago, but it's still really helpful in understanding, who, particularly the organizational members of NLIHC, what is their geographic scope? And so when we look at it, we have about an even distribution between local, regional, and national groups. We have a great number and a much higher percentage of our organizational members, in fact, focus on statewide advocacy. And that's really helpful because these are groups who look at state policies, state laws, and work with their state legislators, and we try to help them then use those strategies they have to apply them to the federal level. And then, again, who are NLIHC members? So we have both individuals and organizations. Individuals can pay either the regular individual rate of $110, or if they're low-income individuals or students, they're welcome to pay $5. And of course, all of these membership levels are, of course, suggested. But again, we have a really wide range of different types of focuses on housing. Some people just find this on a personal level. They want to be engaged in advocacy. Some of them are, again, residents of low-income housing. Maybe they work in low-income housing finance or legal services. Maybe they're a homeless advocate. Really a broad group of people who believe in the mission of NLIHC and who want to be a part of this work on a national level. And so as a member then, there are, obviously we've talked about many different ways to engage with NLIHC, but we want you to know particularly two publications that come to you each week, and that is our Memo to Members and Partners, which of course is our national publication that comes out each week, focuses on policy, research, anything that's happening in the field that's really particularly important. It's really chock full of information. It's pretty thick, we know, and that's because we want you to have all of the information you can. So look out for that every Monday. And then also, as an NLIHC member, you receive Shelter Force Weekly, which is, again, a national publication, has pretty great renown within the housing world, that focuses on different aspects, really brings in a lot of voices into the conversations about affordable housing and the difficulties of constructing and maintaining it. So really gets into those different areas, and also it's a great way to find out about upcoming conferences and events, job openings in the field, things like that. And our members, of course, also are those who come to our policy forum. So our policy forum is open to non-members, but it's a lot less expensive for you, our members. And so our Policy Forum this coming year will take place in March. Registration is open, so you can go to nlihcforum.org and go ahead and register for that. If you have any questions, please let us know. We're really looking forward to broadening our conversation and building the housing movement, having a conversation about that during the Policy Forum. So we've got some changes coming up this year we're really looking forward to, and we hope that you will come and join us for that. Last year, registration filled up really quickly, so if you are interested, please go ahead and register now. And then a few notes about maintaining your membership. So you've all joined for one-year memberships, and that membership will expire at the end of the month. So if you join in mid-October of 2016, your membership expires today on Halloween. And then again, as a note, your dues are only suggested amounts. So I said earlier, memberships for individuals are $110 or $5. Those are all suggested. If you want to pay less than that or more than that, that's completely fine. We want you to be a part of this movement, and we're not super concerned with how much you're able to pay. Those certainly don't let some of our members of the finance team know I said that, but we really do want you to be a part. And so if the membership is an issue, just let us know. And as a note, going forward, you're going to be able to join for renewing memberships if you join by credit card. So you won't have to hear from us once a month, or excuse me, once a year. You'll just be able to re-up automatically. And we'd obviously love to grow this movement and make our voice stronger. And so we'd love for you to help us recruit if you are able to, if you know other organizations or other individuals who you think would be interested. You can let us know or reach out to them directly, and that would be great. We certainly hope you'll do that. So we are so thankful that you are our members, and we want you to know that we are here if you have any questions. I got an email from a member earlier this week saying, hey, I'm going to be up in D.C. visiting some friends later in the month, but I'd really love to take a few hours to visit my members of Congress. Can you tell me who would be helpful to visit, and do you have any materials that'd be great for that? And so I was able to send her that. Anything like that, do let us know. We want this to be as accessible for you as possible. So now I'm going to turn over to James and ask if we have any questions.
All right. So again, thanks everyone so much for joining us this afternoon as we approach the end of our hour together. We've got about 10 minutes left for questions. Everyone on the webinar, you're welcome to type questions into the question box on the control panel of the webinar app, and we'll answer any questions that you've got. While folks are kind of thinking of and typing in your questions, I'll remind you that the session today is being recorded, and everyone will get a follow-up email either this afternoon or tomorrow at the latest with a link to a recording of the session, and that will also be placed on our website. Right now, if you have any questions?
Well, one thing I think that a few people have asked about in the past few months, we traditionally provide our Advocates Guide to new members of the coalition. And when we do so, our hope is to provide you with really kind of the Bible of all housing and community development programs and information, how to be an advocate, how to form an organization within your tenant group, whatever it is. So that's something that we're no longer mailing to everyone because we found some people really thought it was more helpful to find online, and it is all available online. But as a member, you're always welcome to reach out to us about it, either when you join or if you re-up and you want a new version. Let us know. We're happy to do that as well. So James, do we have any questions?
Yes, we've got a couple of questions coming in. One first from someone, a member joining us from the Metro Atlanta area, asks if we have a local presence here. Certainly we do have members as individuals and as organizations in most parts of the country, including Atlanta and including a couple of statewide organizations in Georgia.
We do. So we work with, in Georgia, the Georgia Advancing Communities Together, or Georgia ACT, as well as a few other statewide groups that focus on homelessness or supportive housing. Something that's really interesting about our work, our entire office is based in Washington, D.C., but we work with statewide coalitions around the country. And so, we don't have NLIHC staff in Atlanta or in any other city in the country. However, we do work with local advocates on the ground there, and we also visit different states, but not only Diane making her way across the country, but your organizers as well. We visit different places across the country. So that's the way in which we're able to have a strong local presence across the country.
Great, thank you. And I'll also mention that if you go on our website, we've got a list of all of our state partner organizations across the country, including contact information for our primary point of contact for each of those organizations. And we encourage you to get in touch with them for ways on how you can support them and statewide advocacy efforts that they're involved in. A couple of other questions coming in. So what research do we have on local policies, and what are national best practices on affordable housing?
This is Joey. I'll take that question because it's actually been coming up a lot that some of our state partner organizations and some local organizations are saying, what should we do, what works best? And the frustrating reality with that question is there are certain programs that work, there are certain programs that struggle, but the truth is every tool can work if it's implemented appropriately and if it's the right fit for your particular community's needs and what your state allows, right? So, for example, I can tell you there are so many housing trust funds that work at the state and local level throughout the country. We believe the housing trust funds that have the biggest impact are the ones that make their money available for the lowest income households, right? And then there are various sort of other local programs. So this is a really interesting question. I can't point you to a list of these are the things that work, because obviously if we had that list, we'd be a lot further along in most communities. But we do have general guidelines that we can apply to your community. If you reach out to any of us on the field team, we can sort of provide any of those. So they include things like inclusionary zoning proposals, expanding accessory dwelling units in your community. They include community land banks. They include things like no-cause eviction ordinances that prevent people from being displaced. There are various tools that work better or worse in other communities. Some communities invest a lot in supporting their public housing agency so that public housing isn't sitting there empty because it just needs to be repaired. Other communities like New York and Boston and DC have forms of rent control, which can be very effective if it's implemented in certain ways. But our focus is always on those programs that encourage more supply of housing to meet our growing population and our growing demographic needs. That's a long way of saying, no, there isn't a specific list of what works best, but there are lots of ideas and there are lots of organizations that promote various models that we can connect you to. Very often when we're working on the local level, the biggest help we can provide is to connect you with someone who has done this work in a similar community who can share what their experience has been. I will say if you go to our website and you look at the resources page, you'll find something called the Patchwork Database, which for each state in the country lists the state and local funded housing programs that already exist in your communities. And you can look at other states or communities that you think of as similar to yours and see what they're spending money on and what they're implementing that your community might not be. So I'd really encourage you to take a look at the Patchwork Database if you haven't already.
Great, thank you, Joey. So another, got a great question that's come in about direct advocacy efforts with elected officials. The question is, if you've got an opportunity to meet with your members of Congress or perhaps the staff of your member of Congress, how can NLIHC help you prepare?
Definitely let us know. If you are in a position where your member of Congress is going to be visiting a neighborhood center where you volunteer, or even if you're visiting DC, if you're here just to sightsee, don't let your vacation miss out on a chance to tell your member of Congress what to do. We'll always let you know what the topical and timely issues are, and we'll be able to give you some key data that will help out. If you're doing lobby meetings in DC, like we do each year at our policy forum in March, we're always happy to join those lobby meetings if you think we'd be a helpful addition. So we're always happy to help in whatever way we can with talking points, data, or being on the phone or being in the room. Any way we can help, we're here to do it.
And a question about another form of advocacy, which is joining sign-on letters. So thinking about the sign-on letters that NLIHC typically produces and promotes, the question is whether individuals can participate in sign-on letters, or is that something we usually just do with organizations?
That's a great question, and it's something we talk a lot about here on the field team. For the most part, you've probably seen our sign-on letters usually encourage organizations to sign on, and that's because we find organizations usually have a lot more clout. It's also because when you do a list of individuals, it doesn't really become impressive to a member of Congress until it's a really big list. So a lot of the time, when you open it up for individuals to sign a petition, you don't really have an impact until you have a tremendously large, sort of uptake rate on that. So we are more so than before setting up our sign-on letters and our petitions for individuals to sign on as well as organizations, and we're trying to find ways to implement that more effectively. So that's a great question. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And our last question for now is asking about NLIHC research reports that we publish. And the question is how someone can get hard copies of those reports.
Oh, yeah, sure. Everything is available as a hard copy. There are some things that we print in-house that we can make available just if you contact us and let us know. There are other things that we actually pay to have produced and are fairly substantive. And in those cases, we might ask you to pay a fee for the publication and for the shipping. For things like the Advocates Guide or Out of Reach, that'll be, I believe it's $35. But we actually have a publications form on our website that you can find online, or we can send to you if there's ever a particular publication that you'd like to have in your hands.
Great, and thank you for that, Joey. And got another question another question that came in was a person who asked about local policies is writing from California and will be in town, so we will connect you offline. But it looks like we've got no other questions for now, which is great because we're right about to hit 3 o'clock. So I'll leave you all with contact information for the three of us. If you'd like to get in touch with either Sarah, Joey, or myself for anything NLIHC related, we'd love to hear from you. And again, look out for an email from us later today or tomorrow with a recording of today's presentation and follow-up information. And thank you all again so much for joining us and for supporting NLIHC's work and for all the work that you're doing on affordable housing and ending homelessness.
Bye. Have a great day.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.